Okay, so now that we've defined and unpacked what racial microaggressions are, let's turn our eyes to action. So this section is responding to microaggressions, and we'll look at 3 micro interventions that we can use to address these harmful practices when they take place in front of our eyes. So to help us with this work, we're going to go back to our great professor, Dr. Joel Wing Su, who actually gives us some framing for what we can do to address these harmful practices. So one of the things that Dr. Su found in his research when trying to understand how microaggressions are able to persist in the presence of allies and bystanders is he found that people just didn't know what to do. That when people didn't have the appropriate skill set and tools to address microaggressions as they happened, they actually froze. They weren't confident in their ability to actually intervene in a meaningful way, and so they did nothing. His team decided to come up with strategies that regular people could use to address microaggressions when they happen. He called these things microinterventions, and we have his definition of what they are on the screen. So he feels like these are just everyday individual actions that regular citizens can take to voice their disapproval, to name a microaggression when it happens, or even offer comfort to someone experiencing a microaggression. So it's just subtle changes that can directly address a microaggression that is happening and provide support. So when we think about it, these interventions don't have to be these huge statements or declarations. They can come in many forms. He shares that one way that people can actually implement a micro intervention is if they see something happening, they can make eye contact with the person who is experiencing it and communicate them. You're not crazy. I see it too. This is not okay, and I'm sorry that this is happening to you. So it can be as small as that, or it could be actually directly targeting systems and policies that are aimed at marginalizing certain members of the community. So there are multiple ways that a micro intervention can be put into place. So we want to make sure that you have some tools in your toolkit to address it. So when we think about what this looks like, we can consider the story of Jamal, which was one of the cases that Dr. Seuss studied during his research. And Jamal was a high school student, and he was able to lean on his teacher to actually provide the support that he needed when he was experiencing a microaggression from his classmates. So Jamal, who was the only African American student in his AP history class, was sharing his thoughts on the impact of jazz on American pop culture during a history discussion. But his classmates, they dismissed it. They were like, no, that's not right. There's no contribution. And Mr. Thompson noticed that based on the feedback from his peers, Jamal was beginning to shut down. He was beginning to close himself off. And so when he noticed it, he immediately intervened. He said, I think Jamal is onto something here, something important. He's named 3 exceptionally insightful connections between the roots of jazz and the popularity of American pop culture across the globe. And then he asked Jamal, can you elaborate on your point? The class fell silent, and it gave Jamal the space that he needed to be able to express his thoughts fully and with some level of validation. So this Jamal's story is a prime example of what can happen when a strategic micro intervention is put into place. So when his teacher, Mr. Thompson, validates his insights on jazz, he did more than just correct a moment of dismissal by Jamal's peers. He reinforced the principle that every student's perspective in that classroom is valuable. And this action echoed across the classroom. It challenged the biases that the students had about, what's important in history and what's not. And it reinforced Mr. Thompson's commitment to equity and inclusiveness in his classroom. So these types of interventions are vital for our ongoing commitment to equity in our learning spaces. And it shows how we as educators can play a crucial role in shaping this type of culture. So when Dr. Seuss's researchers interviewed Jamal and they asked him how he felt as a result of the intervention by his teacher, he said that he felt like his voice was important and he felt seen and heard in those moments. And that encapsulates the impact that can happen on our students when we strategically and explicitly leverage micro interventions when we see an aggression happening. So let's dig a little bit deeper into these things. So for our purposes today, we are going to address the 3 micro interventions that Dr. Sue offers that can work. So these are the individual actions that you can leverage to disarm and neutralize microaggressions. So the 3 that we're offering up today is making the invisible visible, disarming the microaggression, and educating the perpetrator. So let's jump in and look at how each of these can be a powerful tool in our journey. So when we have making the invisible visible, that is essentially just acknowledging and explicitly naming the microaggression that's happening, and to name the explicit hidden message that that microaggression has included in it, to both the perpetrator, to the person doing the microaggression, and the person is experiencing it. Our second micro intervention is disarming it, disarming the microaggression. And we can do that by using responses that can neutralize a microaggression that's happening. And there are multiple ways that one can do it. You can use humor, you can use direct statements, but the important part about disarming the microaggression is that your goal is to neutralize the negative impact of that microaggression that's happening, and creating a space where the recipient is feeling supported. And our final micro intervention that we're going to discuss is educating the perpetrator. And here, the focus is around turning a moment of microaggression into a learning opportunity. So it's about engaging the perpetrator in a dialogue and helping them to understand the impact of their words or their actions, and then guiding them towards more thoughtful interactions in the future. So it's about supporting the person. So, we're treating them with grace, but also educating them around why their behavior or their thinking is harmful to others. So when we look at these strategies, these are going to be your guideposts in navigating and transforming microaggressive behaviors in your school communities, because they directly align to our goals of enhancing equity leadership and creating more inclusive educational environments. So now we're going to hop into the case studies. So here's our first micro intervention case. We have Ms. Carter. Now this case represents something that we often see in schools and professional settings, where we have those who have some level of power, privilege or power, who through their hidden biases are creating policies that may have a negative impact on staff or students. So I'm going to give you a minute to read the case, and then we'll think about it. All right, so now that you've read the case, let me ask you, what's the hidden message in Mr. Johnson's statement? And how could his thinking and his actions impact not only his colleagues, but also other students from minoritized groups that he may either directly support or have impact on their academic lives? So take a moment and capture your thinking in your journal. So this scenario, it encapsulates a subtle yet significant microaggression that happens in our schools. It reflects a pattern of thinking around whose narratives, whose stories, whose cultures are actually seen as important and worthy of discussion, of learning and inclusion, versus who's not. And so when we think about this moment for Ms. Carter, it's a critical moment for her for equity leadership, because she can not only address the microaggression, but she can help Mr. Johnson unpack his hidden messages and also think through the consequences, both for students and teachers, of his thinking.